Welcome to the Region Free Gamers podcast. Today, Shaquille O'Neal shares his wisdom.
This is how I keep my 7 feet cool and my 2 feet cool. Foot spray, baby.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Region Free Gamers podcast, where you can rest easy regardless of where you may be in the world because we are fluent in gaming. I am Ozzy, and today I am back in the hosting chair for another episode. But before we get into that, I would like to remind you all that if you like what you hear, you should make sure to deliver a windmill dunk to that subscribe button. And if you have a spare minute, leave us a review on iTunes. In these days of search engine optimization and cryptic algorithms, the only thing we can know for sure is that to get more exposure, we need you to spread the word, and reviews are the best way to do that. And hey, why not tell your friends, uncles, and even your granny about our show? If nothing else, we hope we can be a soothing voice while she knits. So with that out of the way, let me introduce my wonderful co-hosts. From the Great White North, we have our dear friend Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul. I like video games.
And from the state known for his clam chowder on Lovecraftian horror, we have our main man, Puerto Rican Arnie.
Boom shakalaka.
And today we have a special guest. In an effort to improve American relations with Canada, we have invited another longtime listener and supporter of the show. Hailing from Toronto, we have Cam, or as you may know him better on Instagram, 16-bit. How's it going, Cam?
It's going great. Thanks for having me, guys.
No, thank you for joining us. You've been you've been listening to us for a while now, and you're very involved, with our show whenever we release an episode. So it's good to have that kind of relationship, and now we have come full circle, and you can be part of this semi-amateur kind of show, I guess. Semi-pro. So we're glad to have you, man. But we don't want to bury the lead here because we're making a lot of basketball references. And today's episode will be a bit thematically different from our usual topics. I know, like, some episodes back, we had a long chat about the Toronto Raptors. And of course, we had to do that because we have, a very big Toronto fan here and Canadian. And, it's Canada's first, NBA win, so we had to celebrate that. But today we'll be talking primarily about the NBA Jam series and the impact they had on the sports genre. But it's not only going to be NBA Jam, we're also going to be delving into other ridiculous sports games of its ilk. Those are the ones with a focus on fast-paced arcade action with an aim towards maximizing fun. These are not simulations, and we can promise you that there will not be any Madden in this discussion. There may be some references, but Madden is not going to be part of this whole thing. But before we go into the subject proper, it would be good to get to know a little bit more about our guests. So, Cam, are you a native of Canada?
I am. I'm born and raised just west of Toronto in a city called Mississauga.
Nice, nice. So so how far away from Toronto is that?
Oh, it borders Toronto.
Oh, awesome.
So just,
So is that considered like the suburbs, etc., or?
Yeah, it would be considered a suburb of Toronto. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I have to make it up there. So how long have you been gaming, Cam?
Since I can remember, to be honest with you. My brother is 11 years older than me. So when I was born, there was already video games and all that in the house. So, as a kid, you'd see him and his friends playing, and it'd be impossible not to be intrigued, even though at the time it was just, Atari 2600 and stuff like that. But... yeah. When I got old enough to handle a controller, it was, the first thing I wanted to do. And, 37 years later, I'm still playing.
Awesome. So did you get like a lot of hand-me-downs, where it's like, you get to play now with the Atari 2600 while your brother is playing with a super awesome NES?
No. Whatever he had, I was thankfully allowed to touch.
Okay.
Awesome.
And Cam, you're a big Turbo Graphics guy, right?
I am.
I always find
how did that happen?
Yeah, I was gonna say
that's a great question. It just kind of happened. I don't know what to say. When I started collecting, I wanted to get as many consoles as possible, and my brother, going back to him again, he bought me a TurboGrafx from like a local game store for Christmas one year. I think this was 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And I just really liked the console. I liked the kind of underdog aspect of it. I like the games most importantly.
Yeah.
I like shmups, and most people know that TurboGrafx is a huge shmup console. And I don't know, somewhere along the line, I just kind of decided I'm going to go ham on that console, and just started kind of scooping up any game I could for it at a reasonable price, of course.
Yeah, it's not a console that. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
No, I said I had no idea, because following your Instagram, I think yours was one of like the first accounts I started following way back when. And following your account and seeing how much love there is for the Turbo, I just assumed you had it when you were a kid.
That was what I was going to say.
I never touched one until, that one Christmas.
That's hilarious, dude. The way you talk about how horrible Deep Blue is, like, to me, it feels like something
that someone that grew up with it.
Yeah, that was like traumatized by it.
It was given that on Christmas. I was forced to play that. Cam, so what are some of your favorite games? I know that you just said shmups, etc. I'm pretty sure that Rondo of Blood is up there in terms of some of your favorites.
It's a great game for sure.
Great game for sure. We might have our opinions about that.
Stop it. Stop it.
No, but what are some of your other favorite games on the Turbo, etc., or anywhere in particular, really?
So my favorite game of all time, hands down, is Final Fantasy VI. I've been playing that pretty much since it came out. Ever since I thought it actually was Final Fantasy III back in the day.
Yeah.
You know how it got the rename for the North American audience.
Yeah.
I don't know what really makes it my favorite game. I just really, really enjoy it. I love the story. I love the music. I think that was kind of the pinnacle of 16-bit RPGs right there.
So was that kind of was that kind
of what are the time, guys?
Chrono Trigger is, I guess, what you're talking about, Arnie?
No, I think Final Fantasy VI is also a really, really good 16-bit RPG. Especially, at least to me, like, I really enjoyed Chrono Trigger, but story-wise, I think Final Fantasy VI sort of edges it out for me a little bit.
Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from Chrono Trigger. I mean, if I had to say, Final Fantasy VI was my favorite game, I'd probably say Chrono would be a close second.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you say, Cam, that the Super Nintendo was kind of like the pinnacle, the height of your gaming? That's when you really fell in love with it?
Yeah. I would say that. I think I was just around the right age when it came out to, like later elementary school, going into, the first couple of years of high school when it was really, really popular, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And how long have you been on Instagram, dude? Because, like Paul said, you were one of the first follows. I think, Basil Brevis was Gianni. I mean, I followed him, and then, from there I connected with you, etc. So how long have you been there?
February 2015 was when I signed up rather.
Yeah. So you're one of the veterans, I guess. I mean, you already have, a big ass beard, and all these new kids entering the scene. You're like, let me tell you about the year 2015. Oh, that's awesome, man. I mean, I'm pretty sure that, like me, you have been like an influence for a lot of, Instagrammers out there. I mean, I'm not as involved anymore in the community, but certainly, I really liked your posts, when I was starting out, and it served as a source of inspiration for some of the things I was doing. So it's really awesome to have you on.
I appreciate that.
So, and I was just happy to see people out there, because I didn't know, right, when I first started using Instagram, I didn't know that, taking pictures, as my wife says, taking pictures of boxes of video games was a thing. And then I see all these people. I say all these people, but it's like a handful.
Yeah,
like a handful of people who love the TurboGrafx and talk about it and so on. I was like, wow, this is great, right? Because it's been 20 years since I talked to anybody about the Turbo, and it's a really fun system to just kind of to dissect, and because it's like I've said before on the show, it's really top heavy, right? Like the really good games are really good, and then the really bad games are
just
not
terrible.
Great. Yeah, but it's charming, right? I mean, I'm not a child who got a shitty Christmas present, so I don't hate it anymore. The bad games are actually charming and fun to talk about.
Yeah. No, but I mean, we've talked about this before, I believe. I mean, we all hail from like the Instagram community, you know, and the thing about it is that, yes, you're taking pictures of boxes, etc. But, you know, as opposed to like going into like a 4chan message board or something like that, you know, taking these pictures and, you know, kind of jovially and positively just interacting with other people just seems a lot less intimidating than, you know, kind of entering into a clique of sorts, you know, in one of those message boards. So it really is, you know, kind of like an embracing atmosphere where, you know, when you grow up, you know, there may be a few friends that are into games and then you kind of grow apart. And then, you know, as it turns out, you may not eventually end up talking about games at all. So to be able to find those other people out there, it's really just a good experience and a good feeling. So, you know, again, I'm not as involved with it anymore, but it's how we all came together, and it's just nice to see that from all over the world we have people that share a common interest. So,
yeah. Cam, did posting and joining up on Instagram and doing this whole thing, like, did that help reinvigorate your love for the hobby?
I wouldn't say reinvigorated, but it turbocharged it, we'll say. Because, you know, when you're scrolling through your feed and, you know, this person's got this and that person's got that, and it's like, I gotta get that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but it's definitely a thing.
Yeah. There's also that moment of like, sometimes it's just like, whoa, I didn't even know this existed. And that's sort of the moments that I enjoy. Just finding out about new stuff and, you know, learning from all these people who, you know, everybody sort of has their own little niche.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. There's one account I really enjoy. One of the European guys, Sega Collect, who posts just strictly Master System stuff. And there's times where I see something he posted and I'm like, I had no idea that was a thing. And that, at this point in the game, that's not something that comes along very often.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Well, you also realize as well that there are a lot of games that maybe we never notice or we don't hold in high esteem, but for a lot of people, these are games that bring back a lot of nostalgia. Yeah. And it's good to get another perspective on games that you would otherwise not give a chance. I know I have a few of those, but it's always good to kind of engage in the discussion from another perspective than just the general, oh, you know, this game sucks, man. Yeah. You know, so it's a nice different experience, but, I guess we can finally get back into it. And so let's just take a quick break. And after the jump, we'll be talking about some of the early titles in the, let's just call it, ridiculous sports games franchise. So we'll be back pretty shortly. All right, guys, so we're back. And so let's take a look at some of the early titles. I'm pretty sure that there are like a bunch of Atari 2600s, or not a bunch, but like a few, you know, other games from early years that kind of did this. But I guess the first game that, you know, I could see that squarely falls into this, you know, genre that we've, you know, devised, is Cyberball, you know, which was a game that came out in the arcades and it was made by Atari. Came out in 1988, and it is based on American football. So, you know, as we go through these games, we're going to talk about what they were based on and what are some of the ridiculous aspects that they kind of implemented into their gameplay. So this is a really interesting game because, you know, in football, you know, for everyone outside of the United States, it kind of doesn't make sense. But you have downs, and I'm not going to get into an explanation of football, but here, instead of downs, your ball is just basically a hot potato. You know, and you have to keep passing the ball, you know, until it basically explodes. And the only way to reset the ball is to pass certain lines. And of course you play as robots because why not? Yeah. And so this game, I don't know if you guys think the same, but it feels like a way for developers to kind of explain American football to everyone that's outside of the United States. It's kind of like, yeah, like, you know, what's a down? It's basically if you don't go over the line, you know, before this thing counts down, you're going to explode essentially.
That's game over.
Yeah, so it essentially feels like a very straightforward way of explaining American football to everyone outside of the United States. Have you guys been able to see a little bit of gameplay in this game, and would you be interested in playing it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Arnie.
I was just gonna say, this got a port to the Genesis and Super Nintendo, right?
I believe so, but I don't want to speak out of turn here.
Because I haven't seen arcade gameplay, but I've seen console gameplay. And it looks pretty fun, honestly. It looks like they put a good amount of work into like designing the different teams and the team names. And I think part of the aspect also is you get to spend money on a little bit of roster construction. I think you get to buy like certain players right at the beginning of the game. Like if you want like big burly guys, or you want sort of smaller, speedier guys, or a mix of both. It looks really interesting. I just haven't played it enough to where I could say if it's actually enjoyable to play. But it's on that ridiculous side that I know if I saw it in an arcade, it would immediately catch my attention.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's interesting because Atari by this time, they were kind of on, their hind legs. They were trying to just kind of stabilize themselves. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to see kind of an arcade game of this period, just, kind of do something entirely different. Atari, for me, a lot of what they did was just kind of like they had a particular number of games and they just kind of rehashed those games over and over. I don't know if that's a wrong impression, but it just kind of seems like with every new console release, it was like, okay, well, you're going to get another, version of, I don't know, Shoplifter or something. So, it's really cool to kind of see them trying something completely different. And it's just kind of a product, I guess, of, not being in the strongest position. By this point, Nintendo was already eating their lunch, and, in the arcades, Konami, Capcom was already doing, great work. Yeah. Even Midway, was also doing some great stuff, with Robotron, etc. So, it's good to see this. I wonder if, this is a game that, has been released, in modern consoles, that there's been a port or something, on the PlayStation Network or something like that, because I would certainly be interested in playing like an arcade, perfect conversion of it. Cam, have you seen this around?
This is not one I was familiar with until I saw the outline for the episode. This is like right up my alley, though. This sounds absolutely awesome. It's very, very Atari, so to speak. Just when they make something absolutely ridiculous. I would be all over this kind of thing. I didn't realize there was a console port, so I'm definitely going to have to check that out.
Yeah, there was a sequel released on the arcades. It was called Tournament Cyberball 2072. So, you can also see if you can find those. I'm pretty sure it will be really hard to find an arcade version of this, out in the wild, but it would be amazing if we did. Going over, we already mentioned Midway, and I guess the next one is, Arch Rivals by Midway. And you can kind of see this as like the inception point of NBA Jam, because it has the 2-on-2 play, and it's based on basketball, of course. But players are also encouraged to hit other players and are encouraged to steal the ball. So basically, this is, the Detroit Pistons version of basketball, essentially. This is actually a pretty well-known game, and actually a lot of people, have fond memories of this game. So, Paul, did you experience this back in the day?
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. Arch Rivals was a pretty big deal. Like, this was anything before Street Fighter 2, right, is really what it comes down to. Once that game hit the arcades, everything else was almost irrelevant. But we had I remember at the local corner store, we had Arch Rivals, Bad Dudes, Double Dragon, and 1943, for example. But Arch Rivals was so visually appealing. Like, it has these kind of ugly black backgrounds, but the player sprites are quite large and very eye-catching. And, as a child, everything's just a little bit bigger, right?
Yeah.
So I remember, now that I'm, looking at videos of Arch Rivals, the sprites look kind of almost normal or a little bit big. But as a kid, they were gigantic. Like, the players were huge, and they were very, cartoony looking. I don't know, man. It was a pretty fun game.
Yeah, I mean, and it really set up this new form of play, where it's you don't need, your 5-on-5, you can just do a 2-on-2, and that allows for faster, more dynamic play. It really allows you to individualize, play, because it's kind of, for the time period, it's kind of hard to control 5 different players, because we just didn't have like the mechanisms, the controls, kind of like the knowledge, that was necessary in order to really bring forth like a full scale simulation. And also on the arcade, you don't necessarily want to play a 5-on-5 game. So, just putting it down to 2-on-2 just really allows the fast-paced gameplay to kind of spread its wings.
At home you can play a game 5-on-5, right? Because we had like, double dribble on the NES and stuff like that. And that's all well and good, but those are console games that you're playing for longer, you're getting more mileage out of.
Yeah.
In the arcade, you want more sizzle.
Not only sizzle, but you want like those ridiculous moments where like you jump up and you're like, oh my god, this just happened.
Yeah, for sure.
So this really allows you to partake in that.
And you want games to be relatively quick, because you want the more people who are playing the game, the more money you're making. So you don't necessarily want something that's going to drag out too long.
Yeah, you see this guy that's been there for like a week, and he's like, I'm playing a season here, so don't disturb me.
I just want to add that the whole 2-on-2 thing, right? When you're going to play an arcade game, you don't want to really have to spend too much time learning how to play it. Yeah. You just want to pick it up and play before your quarter's done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the 2-on-2 just really gives you the opportunity to do that. I mean, especially if you don't have that many buttons.
Yep.
I don't know, Paul, did this game have a turbo button, or was that introduced later in NBA Jam?
I'm gonna say NBA Jam. I don't know for sure, to be honest with you, because I haven't played it in, I don't know, 30 years.
Yeah.
You don't pop in arch rivals on the regular? That's not in the
Surprisingly
rotation?
not.
Yeah. No, but it's a game that had a lot of influence, and really it served as a foundation, especially, because it was Midway, and Midway, they were the ones that did NBA Jam later. So this really set the stage for what would later become NBA Jam. So, if you see it out in the wild, I'm pretty sure that this is not one that you're gonna probably see. But if you see it, make sure to pick it up. Running to a few more, Basketball, released on the Atari 7800 in 1990, based on basketball. So you guys play this?
I have not.
Dude, I'd never heard about it.
But this is the best name. This is the best title for one of these games. I saw gameplay of it on YouTube, and it just looks kind of terrible, but I haven't played it, so...
But with a game like Basketball, I mean, that almost reminds me of Basketball. Do you guys remember that, from the South Park guys?
Yeah.
It almost reminds me of that type of portmanteau of name. Anyways, it doesn't look good. I hate to say it, but it allows hitting and fighting, so it's a little bit better than, would otherwise have been if it was just a straight basketball game. But I'm a big fan of baseball myself. So I have a very fond spot in my heart for baseball games that are ridiculous. And one of the more ridiculous games that, are the two following games. One is Super Baseball 2020, and that was released on the Neo Geo in 1991. Based on baseball, you kind of play like a futuristic version of baseball, where you play as robots, you can put armor, and you can like upgrade your players with jetpacks, etc., and power up your characters. It's just something completely absurd, from a game like basketball, which is generally known for being a sleepy, kind of game. It's awesome that Neo Geo, the Japanese, were just like, all right, let's just insert jetpacks in here, because that's just going to make this a whole lot funnier.
What game is not better with jetpacks?
I think every game is better with jetpacks.
Yeah.
What was that game called? Like Dark Void, where the whole gimmick is you have a jetpack or something?
Yeah, except that game sucked.
Exactly. So there's your answer, Paul.
That was the same period where Capcom was just doing just weird shit with their properties. That was the same time that Bionic Commando came up, where again, your arm was your dead wife. So I don't know what the hell they were doing at the time. But yeah, this is game, being a Neo Geo game, it just looks amazing. Like the sprite work is just fantastic. It's playable on the Switch. It's been released through one of these Hamster arcade archive collections. So you can actually play it on the Switch. But it just looks very, very nice. It just graphically, Neo Geo was just unparalleled in terms of, its sprite works. But I don't know if you guys, I can pretty safely assume that none of us had a Neo Geo growing up.
Excuse you. I remember as a small zygote playing my Neo Geo before even coming out of the womb.
Yeah, this was your birth year, right, Arnie?
It was. So safe to say I was not born. Since I was born in December, I was not yet a living being when this game came out.
Yeah, well, Cam, do you have any experience with this game?
Not at all, unfortunately. Just looking at it, though, I mean, it looks amazing, as most Neo Geo games did at the time. But, I mean, unless you really saw it in an MVS console in the arcade, it wasn't happening.
Yeah, no, and on top of that, I mean, it's also one of those games, where Neo Geo at the time was just doing like really cool things, like Windjammers, for example.
Yeah,
another game that
sure.
I don't think we're going to talk about Windjammers because I think that falls more into like the extreme sports games, kind of genre. But they were just doing different games. Neo Geo is now known more for Metal Slug, King of Fighters, Samurai Showdown, and just phenomenal fighting games. But they have such a deep stable of just really different titles. It's not just the fighting games, and it's not just Metal Slug. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that SNK nowadays is really doing a lot of good work in terms of trying to provide these experiences, to new players and not just focusing on, their mainstays and their main franchises. I mean, I love that, we have a new Samurai Showdown out there right now, but, something like the SNK 40th Anniversary Collection, which is a bunch of games that, otherwise wouldn't have been released, and Super Baseball 2020, the fact that you can play it on the Switch, it's just huge. I find that it's the best way of, preserving these games and preserving these memories. And, I would love for a game like this to just be made once more. I mean, I would love to like see Mike Trout, with armor, just like, jumping with a jetpack or something.
Yeah. That is really, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but that is really, I think, the ultimate result of these big sort of sports game franchises like Madden, like 2K, like The Show, popping up, is that you don't really see like sports games like this anymore, where it's just, ridiculous and not related to the actual
it's fantasy.
It's to the actual organizations that own these sports anymore.
And that's, I guess, and we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that in later games and later entries. But that's a big part of the reason. Once EA got the license to the NFL, and then later on Sony got the license to the MLB. That was kind of all she wrote. Little by little, all these games just started dying out because, you had all these licensing issues. You couldn't really use the real players, etc. And, there were games like Blitz the League, that tried to do something completely different, with fake players, but it still it didn't feel quite right. But, Super Baseball 2020, I mean, this was also during the time period where, it was the era of home runs. You had Mark McGwire and Jose Canseco on the Oakland A's, the Bash brothers, everyone was roided up. And so, you had Barry Bonds, you had all these amazing players. And, from the Japanese point of view, they wanted to see the home runs. They wanted to see like a lot of the, more exciting aspects of baseball. I mean, if you're a baseball fan, you'll take as much enjoyment from like a pitching duel as much as anyone else. But, for like the general public, they want to see those exciting moments, and these games just maximize that.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it really fun. And particularly, I think baseball is at its heart a really interesting and fun game, but for a lot of people, it's just the downtime is just too much to bear. So when you switch around this elements, and these factors, you can make it accessible to people that otherwise wouldn't partake in it. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know what are your thoughts on that, but, I guess we can also talk about the next one, which was Base Wars, which I know that a lot of people have a very, very fond spot for this game. It was released, on the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1991 by none other than Konami. Konami was just firing on all cylinders at the time. Everything they put out, even if it was just like your regular sports games like Blaze of Steel or Double Dribble, they were just doing good stuff at the time. But with this game, they were like, no, we're not going to do baseball. We're going to just, we're going to add robots. We're going to add fighting. We're going to make them have weapons. We're just gonna go crazy on this. And so Base Wars, it's like Super Baseball 2020, but even more ridiculous. It just ratchets up even more, the level of fantasy and, the fact that now it's like completely outside the realms of reality, basically. Have you guys played Base Wars?
Base Wars is an old favorite of mine. I never had it back in the day. I remember renting it a couple times, and it was a great rental because you could just play the hell out of it for all weekend and probably not really get tired of it. I don't know about maybe owning it as a kid. Maybe after a couple of weeks, you'd be like, all right, the novelty is kind of worn off. But I actually just played it maybe like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and wow, it's still a lot of fun.
It really is. I remember as a kid seeing, did I see commercials for it? I think I saw commercials for it or something in magazines. And I remember seeing like the gigantic robot sprites. Yeah. And I think like as a child at that age, I think that was like peak robot for me. Like I loved robots. And so Base Wars. Yeah, I think so. And Base Wars just scratched everywhere I itched. And I had the exact same experience as Cam. Didn't own it, rented it a few times. Great game. Like it's all these baseball games. Like there's another one you're missing here too, Ozzy. Super Baseball Simulator 1000.
I was going to mention that,
yes. Sorry, I missed that.
No, you should be, but it's okay. But like all these baseball games that take what is, I hate to say it, like a relatively boring sport and spice it up.
How dare you?
I had so
There's
much
a Puerto
time.
Rican and a Cuban here, Paul. Those are fighting words here, man.
Well, I mean, one day you can insult hockey and we'll be even.
If I understood it, I would.
But yeah, man, all these baseball games, like, it's like you said, Ozzy. I wish they could release something these days like Base Wars. I'd probably play it. I don't know if the appeal's there anymore, unfortunately. But man. And I haven't played it recently like Cam, but I'm glad to hear that it's still good.
Yeah, and let me tell you, when you see like the cover for this or you see one of the screenshots, it just kind of feels like, what a kid in 5th grade drew, in his doodle book, a robot with treads looking like a tank, with a massive, metal bat in his hands. Like, that's what you kind of think of, just like it came out of the mind of a 5th grader, basically.
Or even like how the pitchers are basically, they have cannons for arms. Instead of throwing the ball, they blast it at you. It's so cool.
Could you imagine if we just gave cannons to pitchers? It's like, look, we're not going to wear your arm anymore. We're doing too much injuries to your ACLs, etc. So we're just going to give you a cannon. Actually, the setting of the game, the plot of the game is set in the 24th century. So at least they were savvy enough to kick it really far into the future. It wasn't
at
like,
least, yeah, I know, right?
In the year 2015. So at least they did that. In the 24th century, baseball team owners have grown tired of paying outrageous player salaries. I mean, that's a fair complaint that comes up every few years when there's a collective bargaining agreement being negotiated.
Dude, they're tired of it now.
Yeah. So they decide to replace our rosters with cyber robots, eventually leaving Mike Trout unemployed. It's a cool premise, man. I mean, and it was one of the last games, I think it was the last game released on the Ultra label, which was Konami's label to kind of get around, Nintendo's limiting of the amount of games released on the system. So, it was also released for the Game Boy, so you can also play it there. I don't know how good it holds up, but, certainly it's one of the more intriguing games. You can attack with a laser sword, which drains health points,
So good.
What other sports games will give you that? Laser swords. So I would love to see this game, back, online. And I know it's Konami. So maybe we're not going to see the exact same game, but the beauty of this game is that other developers can just kind of, spiritually pick it up and just make a successor to it. So,
Base
certainly
Wars pachinko machine coming soon.
I am surprised. Arnie, there probably is one out there. Probably in one of like the baseball fields or something.
Oh, yeah.
But guys, I'm really excited now because we're going to talk about the main event. And no, I'm not talking about NBA Jam. I'm talking about Bill Laimbeer's Combat Basketball.
So, do you remember, like, maybe 10 minutes ago when I said how these, like, more realistic sports games ended up being the death of games like this? This is, like, the ultimate example of that, because there was, like, there's just a period of time where if you were like a pseudo famous person, you probably got your name on a video game somehow, especially if you were a sports celebrity.
Hey, don't talk about Tommy Lasorda like that, man. Come on.
Listen, James Buster Douglas did good work.
Oh no.
But no, it's like you would never see, I mean, I'm going to knock on wood somewhere, but you would never see like Kawhi Leonard's big hand slam or like, you know,
why not? God, that would be so awesome.
Like, that's never gonna happen now. Though we all wish it would. Or like, I don't know, Anthony Davis's eyebrow simulator or something. But like, this is, I think, especially Bill Laimbeer's is probably the best argument for why we shouldn't do that. Because on the one hand, like, this is one end of the spectrum, and then the other end of the spectrum for me is like Michael Jordan's Chaos in the Windy City, which is so ridiculous and hilarious that I wish more games would exist like that.
You know, to me, the more the merrier. You know, if you have more like D-list, you know, players getting their own games,
yeah,
you know, the more ridiculous they can be, you know, because they're going to have to do something to stand out. So when you have someone like Bill Laimbeer, and for everyone outside of the United States that was not born in the 80s, Bill Laimbeer was, I believe he was a power forward, or
he was a center.
He was a center, yeah. He was a center for the Detroit Pistons. The Detroit Pistons around this time were a very detested team because they played really, really dirty. And Bill Laimbeer was one of the guys that, you know, they built this reputation on. And so, of course, because him being Bill Laimbeer and an asshole, you know, he, you know, decided to put his name to this game called Combat Basketball.
Yeah.
And it's horrible.
Yeah, Bill Laimbeer was essentially what in hockey terms I think you'd call a goon, right? Like, I think
he was so much more, though. He was so much more because, like, hockey goons, the thing about hockey, too, is, and football to an even greater extent, is that they all wear helmets.
Yep.
So, like, maybe hockey in the 70s, I guess, was different. The players just had more personality, right?
Yeah.
And that's the nice thing about watching basketball is that you can see everything. Like, you can see their faces. And, dude, Bill Laimbeer, like, if you look, man, he has the most punchable face. He's like Cristiano Ronaldo. You know what I mean? Like, you see that face
no, man,
and you're like,
no.
mother, I just want to punch that guy, right?
No, Cristiano Ronaldo's like a pretty boy, but Bill Laimbeer just looks like an asshole. He looks like,
dude,
you know, like that Biff from Back to the Future, you know, like that.
He does.
That
he
kind
really
of
does.
asshole type, you know, where like,
but have
man,
you ever seen Ronaldo complain after a call?
Yeah,
come on, man. Tell me you don't want to punch that guy.
Hey, listen,
and I'm Portuguese.
You're
dude.
the Portuguese
like,
guy here, so
I know
you're like digging your own grave here, man.
But yeah, like, and he was rich. Like, dude, Laimbeer, he was like, he grew up as a rich kid too. He was like this rich white kid who played basketball, so everybody hated him even more. And if you guys, I actually have a quote that I got here because
is
like,
it a dramatic reading time or?
Well, no, it's not dramatic reading time, but like once you start reading about Bill Laimbeer, it's like eating Lay's potato chips. It's like I can't stop reading about this guy. He's such an asshole, like such a colossal dick. Like former Celtics player Cornbread Maxwell.
Oh hell yeah.
I know, right? Like, can we take a second here and appreciate that there was a guy named Cornbread Maxwell? What a great name.
Oh my god.
But yeah, about Bill Laimbeer, he said the guy flops around like a fat lady at the circus. He couldn't knock out my wife.
Wow.
Like, what a product of the 80s, right?
Oh
like, the fact, like, he just insulted so many people and, you know, kind of hinted at spousal abuse. but back then, you know, whatever. We're just throwing that quote out there.
Yeah.
Back then, it was seen as endearing, maybe. God. And so this Detroit team, actually, they won in what, 1989?
They won back to back, I think. They won two.
They did,
two
yeah.
championships.
So they were kind of like the big competitors with Michael Jordan's, Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, during that time, they were the reason that Jordan couldn't make it to the finals, pretty much. He kept running into Detroit.
So that was another reason why they were hated. It was just like, there's this huge phenom, and he's like this star player from North Carolina, and, everyone loves him, and we want to see him get his first ring, kind of like LeBron James back in the day. And there's this team that is, by all accounts, a pretty detestable team, with Isaiah Thomas, Bill Laimbeer, etc. And they're just getting in the way of it. So yeah, Bill Laimbeer was not the most likable guy. I don't know if we have like a proper, analogy for Bill Laimbeer nowadays. I mean, I would like to think like maybe Tom Brady. Tom Brady's, cheating football.
What an ass. What an ass. Tom Brady's cheating football? Oh man, I want to see that so badly.
We need an outside editor who can edit all these parts out.
Listen, I give that serial Tom Brady set of 100. But anyways, if you see Bill Laimbeer's Combat Basketball, you will not know what's happening.
No.
I had never actually played this, and I watched gameplay of it, and I had no idea what was happening the entire time. I was so confused.
I honestly watched Let's Plays, and I was just like, am I missing something? Like, I can't.
You kind of are, actually, I think.
Yeah.
Because the dirty secret of this game is that it's not a basketball game. This is based on like I don't know, some kind, like, man, what were those games called? The ones that were released, like, for the Amiga? They weren't quite sports games. Like, you throw a ball, it's like Speedball or something like that. In any case, we don't need to sit here and think about it, because that's not good pod. But that's what this game is. It's not an actual basketball game. It's like a made-up sport that loosely resembles basketball.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, we need to release this in the US because it's a good game. But how are we going to sell it? Oh, we'll just get this gigantic dick and we'll put his name on the front, and there you go.
So do you think that, because you just said good game and Bill Laimbeer's Combat Basketball in the same sentence, do you actually think it's a good game?
No, it's terrible. Especially if you're looking for a basketball game. Like if it was, Bill Laimbeer's Combat Wonderball, then okay, we might have a case. But if you're buying this game and you're expecting a basketball game, and then you get this weird overhead view like thing, I don't know. It's not very good.
Thing.
Yeah, I mean, this game is you could probably find it dirt cheap somewhere. But then again, I'm saying that right now, and it may turn out to be like $100. This has never happened to me before. But
if it was released by Working Designs, then yeah.
Perhaps. You imagine a Working Designs Bill Laimbeer's Combat Basketball.
I know. Victor Ireland presents Bill Laimbeer's Combat.
Bill Laimbeer
with like embossed Bill Laimbeer face. Anyways, let's move on from Bill Laimbeer, because we already talked way too much, about Bill Laimbeer than we probably should. So let's go to Mutual League Football. This is a game that I would love to see back. I know that there have been a few spiritual successors of sorts, but it was released on the Genesis in 1993 by EA. And you remember when I mentioned that we were not going to talk about Madden? Well, this is the only reference to Madden I want to make. The actual engine for Mutual League Football was the one that was eventually used for Madden. So, in it, you can kind of see the groundwork for what would later become Madden, but it's just a completely out there just fantasy. So, you play as mutants, of course, but it's, takes place in an irradiated post-apocalyptic Earth. Humans have either mutated or zombies have arisen. And so every team has kind of its own theme. And so in the field, there are all these different hazards. The players, the different teams have different kind of thematic, hazards in their fields, and exploding balls, jetpacks, electric shocks. You can even attack the referee. You can bribe the referee. I mean, this just sounds like a good time to me, guys. I think that this game really deserves, a spot in the modern settings. What do you think about Mutual League Football, Paul?
I think that the only way these games are viable these days, okay, actually, you know what? First of all, Mutant League Football is awesome. Let's just get that out of the way, right? But the only way that it could be viable these days is if you had the NFL license and then you took the players and you made them zombies and monsters.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
Roger Goodell would never allow that. He spits on your idea, Paul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because he's terrible.
I mean,
it's
but
a great idea.
you know, when you really think about it, Rob Gronkowski's already a monster, so you really wouldn't be going too far down the stretch.
I think you meant to say Aaron Hernandez, but I'll forgive you this one time.
Come on, man.
Oh,
No.
dude.
Too soon, man.
Too soon.
Too soon. But in any case, Cam, have you played Mutant League Football?
Unfortunately, I have not. This was a game that I always wanted to play back in the day, but I didn't have a Genesis, and my friends who had Genesises, they didn't have it either. So that was it, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading about it a lot in magazines and just like thinking about how cool it was. I just want to say this is kind of almost the same theory as Bill Lambier's Combat Basketball. Take a sport and make it, violent and ridiculous, except the difference is this one's good. Very good.
Yeah, but I would love, for example, to see, and when I say love, it would never happen, but I would like to see how it would work out. Like if like sports teams, actually had, kind of thematic, like obstacles in their fields. So like home team advantage would really mean something.
Wow.
So like, let's say you're in Green Bay, you have to like fight through glaciers and stuff like that.
Just a giant wheel of cheese comes out.
Wheels of cheese, you're like rolling down or something. You imagine the Miami Dolphins, you just have like super intelligent dolphins just like, getting in your way or something ridiculous. Like, I would love for something like this to actually be like put into practice, like the Extreme Football League or something. Because I would love to play this. I would, it's everything I want in a sports game.
Has this one not been put on any of the Sega compilations? That
No,
Really?
because it's an EA game,
Yeah,
so.
EA's, holds onto their IPs with death grip, right?
Well, there's your problem right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got a little
I just want to
EA in
mention, I think it was last year that they put out a new Mutant League Football.
there. Yep.
It was on Switch, I
Football
believe.
League or something.
Yeah, it was a spiritual successor. I think I have the name somewhere here. Do you remember, Arnie?
I think it's Mutant Football
Mutant
League.
Football League. Yeah, Mutant Football League. And so, yeah, it's not done by EA or anything like that, but, it seems like it's just an indie game, kind of like one of those Kickstarter spiritual successors. Don't know if it's any good. But certainly it takes its inspiration from the original Mutant League Football. And strangely enough, in an age where we see games getting ported everywhere, this is a game that only came out on the Genesis, like Cam mentioned. So it's weird that it was just confined to this one console. And I wonder if it's because the Super Nintendo just, could not translate some of the, sprite work or fast movements or something like that. I mean, they eventually did it with Madden. So I imagine that, it could achieve it. But I suppose maybe they didn't have time to do so.
I wonder if the content was a problem for them too.
No, the problem was that they had their B team working on the SNES stuff back then. EA always had their best guys working on NHL and Madden and so on the Genesis, because Sega was kind of the first company that opened the door for them. So that's how they used to do it. And then they'd have their interns working on the SNES.
Well,
No, I'm serious.
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt it, man. I don't doubt it. But that's how you get, really cool experiences. I mean, so we also have Mutant League Hockey, and that's kind of the sequel. Well, not kind of the sequel to Mutant League Football. And I'll leave this to you, Cam, and Paul, because you guys understand hockey better. But based on my understanding, pucks can explode in hockey. So, I don't know if that's right or not, but at least it's right in Mutant League Hockey. So yeah, I mean, it's similar to Mutant League Football. You have like all these different obstacles, etc., but you also have landmines, and you have like a demon goalie, and, it's just like the same experience, but just translated to hockey. I don't know if you were able to play this, Paul, but does it translate as well as it does with football?
No, I mean, no, in that I didn't play it back in the day, which is bizarre. Like, I actually played Mutant League Football, but not Mutant League Hockey. It's kind of hit or miss back then, right? Like, you go to a used game store. We never bought games brand new unless they were gifts. Mm-hmm. And so you go to the used game store and you kind of, take what you can get. And so we never saw Mutant League Hockey. Which in retrospect actually probably means it was really good because nobody was giving it back to the store, right?
Yeah, perhaps. But it also came out late in the game. I mean, it came out in 1994. By then, you were kind of entering the next generation of consoles. The PS1 would release that year, and the Saturn released that year. So, you could probably see the Genesis kind of being a little bit less relevant by this point in time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how about you, Cam?
No, unfortunately not. Same story with, Mutant League Hockey, football. I mean, I didn't have a Genesis, and if someone I know didn't have it, it just wasn't happening. And unfortunately nowadays, it seems to be, kind of pricey, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Probably because it was released so late.
Yeah, definitely. That's usually a thing.
Yeah. But just to round off, the Mutant League discussion, there was actually an animated series based on the franchise released from 1994 to 1996. Around this time, if you had a vaguely popular concept, you would get a cartoon with it. So we're going to take a break, and we'll get back to you talking about NBA Jam. All right, guys, we're back, and now we're going to talk about the NBA Jam series. And this is the game that, there are a few influential games out there that, their influence cannot be contested. Super Mario Brothers, Grand Theft Auto 3, Zelda. I would say NBA Jam is right up there. NBA Jam was kind of a game that, for its time, it really just changed everything. Everyone wanted this sorts of games. Of course, it's based on basketball. And this was, around a time where there was a lot of emphasis in basketball on the particular players, and, the players had kind of like started building their own brand. And so you developed a sense of affinity with the various players and various teams. So you had Jordan, and all these other types of, famous players. And, with NBA Jam, you had the 2-on-2, so you were able to just focus on the stars. And, you were able to play a game of basketball that just basically defied the laws of gravity and reality. And the great thing about NBA Jam is just like, it's the perfect pick up and play game. It's kind of like the same with, just going out to the courts and playing a pickup game of basketball. You can pretty much just go into a bar, you're about to go in for a few drinks, you see an NBA Jam cabinet, on the back, and you're like, we gotta do this. I'm pretty sure that all of us at some point or another have had that experience where it's like, there's an NBA Jam arcade cabinet, I'm going to have to play it, and I'm going to trash talk, about it. So what was the first, experience, for example, Paul, what was your first experience with NBA Jam? When was the first time that you encountered it, and what was it like?
Well, it was in the arcade, right? Of course. And it's, it didn't do anything like, I don't know, that different from arch rivals, like on a fundamental level, except that it turned up all of the showmanship to like 11, right? The high flying dunks, he's on fire. The voice stuff was really good. Like it's not like we hadn't heard voice in video games up to this point, but like that announcer, and I don't know what it is about hearing he's on fire. Like I almost sounded like Dalsum there, but like, I don't know what it is about hearing that just gets you so hyped. And of course the boom shakalaka, right? Yeah. I mean, like, man, there's just something about it.
Well, it's become, something like that phrase boom shakalaka has just become entrenched in popular culture. Like now it's something that goes even beyond NBA Jam itself, and it's been referenced everywhere else. So it's a game that has really even transcended its form, to find its way into different parts of popular culture. So it was super successful. It had over $1 billion in quarters, which is absolutely insane when you think that this is just 25 cents at a time. It's absolutely mind blowing,
Trying to fathom what $1 billion in quarters actually looks like.
I cannot picture it. And I mean, it's only other arcade machines like Pac-Man, that have really gotten up to this level of, success. So, with that, Cam, what was your experience with this one? I mean, did you play it growing up?
I'm trying to remember if I played it in the arcade first or at home first. It's just been so long, right? But regardless, I did play it a fair bit at home, renting it for Super Nintendo. And yeah, pretty much everything you touched on. The announcer was just great. Hearing, he's on fire. Is it the shoes was a classic. We joked about that one today, like some of my friends and I.
Yeah. So was that a Spike Lee reference? If I recall, the Spike Lee used that. Is it the shoes?
I think it was a commercial.
Yeah, it was a commercial. Yeah, it was a commercial with Spike Lee.
It was the Michael Jordan commercial.
Michael Jordan and Spike Lee.
For the Air Force Ones. The Jordan ones?
The Jordans. Yeah,
I'm not a sneakerhead, so I don't want to venture into this world right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I mean, the thing about the game is, as Paul mentioned, I mean, the ball would even catch on fire. You could jump to, really ridiculous heights. You could do like triple windmill, whatever, just 360 dunks. Like, the only thing that it was missing was like you doing backflips and stuff like that in order to like dunk it or something. But pretty much every kind of, it was more as much of a gymnastics game as it was a basketball game, basically. So it's, I don't really mean that. I'm just exaggerating. But it really had a huge impact on multiplayer games. It's a game that even if, nowadays arcades have long since died, it's this arcade machine, maybe the Simpsons arcade, and maybe Pac-Man, that if you are out and about in a social setting, you're very likely to find, an NBA Jam cabinet out there. You could still see them out in the wild, and they're still hugely popular. And particularly because, basketball remains the same game. So even if you have no experience previously with NBA Jam, it's really easy to figure out what you're doing. There are not that many buttons, and you can just, get into it and just kind of figure it out as you go. I mean, you may have like a little bit of a learning curve, but you can just figure it out as you go. It's a very accessible game, so that it just essentially kind of, democratizes the access to it. And so everyone, even if you're not a gamer, can really play it. So Arnie, have you had a lot of experience with NBA Jam?
Actually, yeah. I remember playing it for the first time at one of our local arcades, like next to a movie theater or something. But NBA Jam, going back to something you had said, is really one of those like let's go games. Like, and to me, those are usually like fighting games. Like you're with a buddy and you see that machine and you're like, all right, let's go. Like we're gonna play a few rounds, and that's usually reserved for like something like Street Fighter 2 or Soul Calibur or something like that. But NBA Jam was one of those games that's like, we're gonna throw down and like talk a bunch of shit, and I'm gonna dunk on you. I remember that some of those ridiculous dunks were just long enough, like the animation was, where you could like look at somebody and let them know, like, yeah, this just happened.
It was a throwdown game. Like
it really was.
I just dunked on you basically, and just take it, basically. Yeah. It really allowed you to indulge in a lot of trash talking.
Yeah,
and it brought
especially
out that,
because catching on fire, I think you had to score like 3 times in a row or something like that. So when you got on fire, you were like, I am owning the shit out of you right now.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's also very much a communal game, with like fighting games, with Street Fighter 2, for example, you see people like, huddled around the arcade, and they're all like cheering for one or the other. This is a game very much like that. Arcade machines tend to be, even though they may be social and you're playing 2, 3, 4 players, or in the case of X-Men, 6 players. But at the same time, if you're playing like a beat 'em up or something like that, yeah, you could look at it, but it's not as exciting because you're kind of just going on a belt, essentially.
Yeah. And like Cam was saying too, when you're in an arcade, and you all of a sudden just hear like boom shakalaka, or he's on fire, or is it the shoes? Like you perk up, you're like, oh, there's an NBA Jam machine in here. Like I gotta go find it now.
Yeah, but it almost feels like when people are like surrounding you and they're just like, oh, and everyone's like hollering and stuff like that. It really plays to that. So it does. It kind of translates the street basketball experience into an arcade, where the spectators are much as part of the experience as the game itself.
Yep.
And it's also very much a product of the 90s. It's a game that, you could unlock Bill Clinton, Al Gore, etc.
The Beastie Boys.
So good.
That's right. And Hugo, the Charlotte Hornets mascot, which
That's right.
is like the most 90s thing ever. I remember seeing that logo on everything.
Yeah,
Oh,
basically.
yeah.
Pretty much. And so it's a game that it's very much stuck in its time, but that it, even with that, it still has aged very well. You can still very much play it, and it doesn't feel cheap. Even though it's fantastic, you still feel like, the game plays by its own set of rules. So, it basically has been ported everywhere. It's kind of like Doom, where it's just been, if it plays something, it probably has NBA Jam on it. But in this setting, I have to talk about, the only person in this podcast right now that owns it on the Jaguar, is our dear Cam. So Cam, tell us a little bit about your Jaguar NBA Jam experience.
Okay. All right. I'm going to back up just a little bit. So I have a very good friend of mine, Andrew. You probably know him as the high cam guy on each and every one of my posts.
Yep.
On Instagram. Anyway, like a few years ago, we just started playing NBA Jam on Genesis for whatever reason. It's probably the whole easy and quick to pick up thing, because he's not really much into video games himself, except when he's around me. And, we played it to the point where we were beating the crap out of the game on very hard. And we're like, this is great, like we're amazing at NBA Jam, blah, 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 blah. And, I finally found a Jaguar version of NBA Jam TE at a fair price, because, Jaguar's not exactly the cheapest system to collect for.
Yeah.
And anyway, we're like, all right, we got a better game on a quote unquote better console. Let's play, let's do this. And we're getting our asses kicked on very easy. Like, what is happening? The difficulty just got turned up to like 11.
Oh wow!
On that version for whatever reason. I don't know if that's peculiar to the Jag version or just TE itself was a harder game. Anyway, it's a very arcade faithful port. It looks and sounds excellent. The only thing I believe is missing from the arcade is some of the sound samples. When they crammed it onto a cartridge, something's got to go, right?
Yeah.
When you're working with CDs, you can, go crazy, right? You have all the storage in the world. But yeah, it's a legitimately great game for the Jaguar. It's just, it's on the Jaguar.
Yeah. did it ever, it never got a Jaguar CD port, did it?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Yeah. Well, another thing I wanted to talk about this game is the graphics, because at least to me, it's not a game that looks good. And I don't know if, you guys feel the same way. It kind of has that like Mortal Kombat, digitized feel to it, where it feels like they took pictures of players or spectators, etc., and they just kind of animated that. It's not a great look or one that has necessarily aged well, but it doesn't really matter because it just kind of looks cartoony. Yeah. Particularly because the character players, their heads are like massive.
Yeah, so, that's what I was gonna say. Is I do agree with you that it might not look the best, but somehow, and I don't know if this is just my bias from having played it like back in the day, it just sort of fits with the rest of the game, how ridiculous everything is. It just sort of works.
Yeah.
It really does. And I think that's part of the secret sauce to the game, right? Like, the graphics don't have to be great, but what they have to do is they have to make the players recognizable.
Yeah.
And it's, it really kind of comes part and parcel now that I think about it with what I said earlier, with what a modern Mutant League football would need. It would need real players. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing about NBA Jam too, is that it has the real players. It's a very big deal to be able to play with Shaq.
Oh, yeah.
Although later versions you couldn't, because he purchased his own likeness for Shaq Fu and all those other great games.
Well, I didn't realize that the NBA just like owns your likeness unless you buy it from them.
Yeah. Jordan and O'Neal did.
That's right.
And that's why Jordan's not in NBA Jam. Instead, you have Scottie Pippen and Ron Harper, I think. So everybody who picks the Bulls is like, what?
Well, who am I playing as?
But you can like totally tell the players apart. And, and I think that's the key. Like, similarly to Cam, I played the Genesis version fairly recently with a buddy of mine. And like, when you pick Muggsy Bogues, who's like 5'2". Yeah, I'm not even kidding. When you pick Muggsy Bogues, like it looks hilarious on the screen. It looks like you know, Peter Dinklage or Willow, you know, dribbling a basketball on the court.
No
It's
offense
great.
to Peter Dinklage, you know, we love him here.
Yeah, no, man, Lannister.
A great offense to Moxie Bogues.
For all our non-sports listeners, Muggsy Bogues was also featured in Space Jam, the iconic Michael Jordan vehicle.
Yeah, well, he's a walking cartoon, really. I'm not even like a little guy like that playing in the NBA.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays that would never fly, but back then, oh man.
Yeah. No, I mean, you just brought me back to Space Jam, Arnie. God, I love that movie. Yeah, I mean, all the characters feel like they're its own different player. You know, it's not like you feel like everyone is just like a copy paste of the other, you know, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses. So it makes every team, every sports team just kind of feel different from each other. So, you know, it's just a really, really well done, you know, finely tuned game. I'm pretty sure that if, you know, I went into it, you know, you could probably find a bunch of like balancing issues and stuff like that. You know, there's probably like, you know, an overpowered, you know, team, but.
Oh yeah, some teams are just useless.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and then, you know, we should also talk about the, you know, the announcer because we've kind of referenced him, but, you know, his name is Mark Turmel. Turnell or Turmel?
No, his name is, I have it up here. It's Bulls radio announcer Tim Kitzrow.
Oh, Tim Kitzrow.
Yep, doing an impression of Marv Albert, apparently. Marv
awesome.
Albert being one of the, you know, most famous sports commentators ever, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And so he's known for like those phrases like he's on fire, boom shakalaka, etc. So it just brings with it a certain sense of hype, you know, to the game. So, you know, when you talk about NBA Jam, you can't really separate, you know, the announcer from it. It's just such a huge part. And if, you know, any new NBA Jam games, they will need to incorporate, you know, that kind of, you know, announcing to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the game was released in a ton of different, ports. The tournament edition, which Cam referenced, you know, came out in 1994. You know, it had, updated rosters, you know, new music, a tournament mode, etc. It had, Mortal Kombat characters. So that was, really, really, fun. You could play as Raiden or Sub-Zero or Reptile. You know, even though, you know, it was removed at the request of the NBA.
Yeah, that was like on the test version of TE, they had all these extra hidden characters that they eventually asked them to remove. I wanted to say there is, for our listeners, and I think we'll put this in the show notes, there is a really interesting ESPN interview with Mark Turmel, who's one of the lead designers of the game, about the process of designing NBA Jam. And he dropped some really crazy knowledge. My favorite was that apparently Shaq, when the game came out, Shaq bought 2 NBA Jam machines. One he would keep at his house, and then the other one he had shipped around to every city where he was playing at the time, so he could set it up at the hotel and play with his teammates.
That's fantastic.
So I just imagine Shaq being like, "Yo, man, you wanna play some NBA Jam right now with Shaq?"
I'm just trying to picture Shaq playing a cabinet. He'd be all like hunched over.
I know, right?
But you know, I guess, you know, I kind of see like the strange things here, but you know, this is what you get when, you know, you have a pretty young kid, you know, suddenly have a bunch of money. You know, it's like, what would be your ideal, you know, fantasy? I want an NBA Jam cabinet.
Well, honestly, when I read that, I was like, Shaq is like a million times more relatable to me now, because that's exactly what I would have done if I was like, I was Shaq.
Yeah, it's like the NBA version of Richie Rich, maybe.
And then actually, speaking of the Pistons real quick, Ozzy, Mark Trammell was a Pistons fan. So apparently in NBA Jam, when Scottie Pippen plays the Pistons, when the Bulls play the Pistons, Scottie Pippen's stats drop significantly, and he's much worse.
Wow. As if he hadn't suffered enough. Well, but, you know, around 1995, you know, we have an issue because at that point, Midway lost the rights to the NBA Jam name. They didn't lose it. They sold the rights to the NBA Jam name. So NBA Jam would kind of continue, but it would be called College Slam. And this was with like Division One men's basketball teams, rather than the NBA teams. So yeah, it's essentially NBA Jam, but with no like star players or anything. So it didn't really do that well. On the side though, Acclaim had, NBA Jam games, which, I don't know if, our listeners have a lot of experience with Acclaim, but, even me as a kid, whenever I would see Acclaim, I would always have a sense of skepticism, because their games were usually not that good. So it was not a very good developer. They didn't publish the best games. Mm-hmm. And so they acquired the rights to the NBA Jam name from Midway. And so, they kind of went towards a more realistic route with NBA Jam, which is like, you're kind of missing the point if you're doing that. Like, is it really NBA Jam if you're making it realistic? And so they came up with a number of games, like NBA Jam Extreme, NBA Jam 99, NBA Jam 2000. And, funnily enough, 99 and 2000, they only came out on the Nintendo 64. So it's not like you could even, have, a lot of different ports, like you play it on the PS1 and stuff like that. So, I think a big part of why NBA Jam died out as a franchise is because Acclaim got the rights to it, and that was basically poison. And so they just mismanaged the brand. I mean, if you're playing NBA Jam, you don't want it to be realistic, and you want it to be, available to as many people as possible so that you can spread, the popularity of the franchise. So, I mean, none of these games that Acclaim developed were, particularly well received, and they're not really seen as, even though they're named NBA Jam, they're not really seen as NBA Jam games, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'm just shaking my head here, man. God damn it, Acclaim. Again?
They couldn't get anything right. It's almost uncanny. Like,
oh, man.
I don't know what the hell is going on with those guys, honestly. I mean, they were based out of Texas, I believe, but, they just did not know what they were doing. Absolutely. I mean, once in a while they like hit, a pretty good game like Turok, and after that they just like pumped out like 3 more sequels. Mm-hmm. But they just were not a good developer or publisher. And so of course they went bankrupt in 2004, and, with it, the NBA Jam name went with it. And so EA acquired the rights to the name sometime later. But yeah, Acclaim just kind of like drove the franchise to the ground. But on the side, you had Midway kind of continuing, the franchise with its own name. So they released NBA Hang Time, which was released in 1996, for arcade and home consoles. And it was ported to the 64, PS1, even Super Nintendo and Genesis, which were like completely on their way out at this point. I'm seeing here that there was a version of the Tiger Gamescom, to be released, but that never happened.
And I'm sure it would have been the best.
I'm pretty sure. But one of the cool things about NBA Hangtime is that it introduced character creation. And as anybody that has played a wrestling game knows, character creation is probably the best thing about any sports game.
Absolutely.
So it really allowed you to have that flexibility of just like making your own ridiculous characters. It also had Kobe Bryant, in the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation versions. So, it's a pretty cool game. And you could also, I think, this was the game where, Midway finally got to put in, some of like, secret characters that they wanted to put in terms of Mortal Kombat. NBA Hang Time, it doesn't really have like the same esteem as NBA Jam, but if we're talking about the successors, that was kind of it.
Yeah. Best hidden character, you can unlock Matthew Perry.
Thank you, Arnie. I can't believe Ozzy was going to just like not talk about that. Could that be any more of a miss?
I blocked it out, dude. I just completely airballed that.
You got to give Chandler his respect.
This was the age where Friends was a pretty big sensation. So I guess Matthew Perry, this is the highlight of his career.
Hell yeah. Dunking on fools all day.
It was all downhill from there.
Absolutely all downhill from here. I think, Paul, you may have more of a fascination with Matthew Perry than I do. I don't know. Were you guys able to play this? I mean, the problem with this game is that it suffered from the fact that it didn't have the NBA Jam name.
Yeah.
And, it's almost impossible to overcome that, because you have another game done by shitty Acclaim, which is not as good. And, it's kind of like NBA Hangtime didn't really have, much of a chance.
Yeah. I think the only time I played this was in arcades. I think I did see one of these arcade machines at some point, and I think I really played it just because I was tired of playing NBA Jam at that point. So I was like, oh, let's try this one. And from what I can remember, which is very vague because this was a very long time ago, I mean, it was a fun, arcade basketball game, but there was just something about NBA Jam that, like whatever magic potion they made, like all those things put together just created something that, is just irreplaceable.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a sequel to this called NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC. And I think everyone has a clear picture of this game if they actually see it, because the cover is so freaking amazing.
The cover's great.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. It's almost like high art.
That's what I was going to say, is because I put this picture of this cover in our notes, and I'm going to try my best. I think it's Shaquille O'Neal dunking a basketball that is on fire, but now imagine if you put like a shitty like 19th century classical painting filter over it, while he's like, his face is what I can only describe as like extreme pain / anger at the basketball hoop.
It's a grimace, but he's also kind of delighted. So it's kind of like a Mona Lisa where you can see like many different expressions.
It's like he's angry, but he's laughing at the same time. He's also on a very weird angle. I don't know if you guys noticed. Like, it doesn't look like he's gonna dunk the ball. It looks like he's falling.
Yeah.
He's probably like, oh shit, this ball's on fire. I gotta get rid of this right now. Gotta give me some Gold Bond, some icy hot for my hands.
I'm going back to Shaq Fu.
I love Shaq so much.
Yeah.
But that somebody, if not he himself, somebody on his team saw this and was like, no, this is good. We'll okay this.
Yeah.
So
if you have Google, Google it.
Yeah, please,
you will not
please do it.
You will not be disappointed. I guess this game had a few things that weren't, well received. So it introduced personal files, like, like what's the point of that? Like, why would you introduce personal files? That, again, it's kind of, it's a phenomenon that happens as you iterate upon, any type of work, that you keep adding things to it just because you think you have to.
Yeah.
And by doing so, you're kind of messing with the formula. And it's like, you're missing the point here, guys. Like, you should not change what essentially worked before.
Yeah.
I mean, by this point, Acclaim, this game was released in 1999. By this point, Acclaim had 3 years of fucking up the formula. So we can't necessarily fault them. I mean, at least it took them a while for them to like mess it up.
You can't be angry if you expect it.
Yeah. And so, but it still was NBA Jam in a way. I mean, it had the secret characters, I'm seeing here like Frankenstein's monster, like the Bride of Frankenstein. So basically they just got the license to all the Universal movie monsters.
Well, that's the thing, is like, even down to the unlockable characters, we are starting to see like the bottom of the barrel.
Hey. The Universal movie monsters are amazing. So
they are, but I'd rather play as Matthew Perry in my insane NBA games.
Come on,
you're right. I would rather too. Yeah.
At least give me Matt LeBlanc or something.
It'd be great if it was like, if you control fat Matthew Perry from like the latter half of Friends, but then when he's on fire, he goes into cocaine Matthew Perry. Yeah.
Yeah, but one of the things that this game was very well received for is that it featured the return of the NBA Jam announcer, Tim Kitzrow.
Yep.
So that was kind of like a very good, harkening back to the original NBA Jam. So came out on the 64 and other home consoles, really.
Yeah, I think it got, the general home console.
Yeah, like Dreamcast, PlayStation, even on the Game Boy Color, which I can't vouch for the quality of that version, but
I can. It's terrible. I haven't played it, but I'll tell you right now, it's terrible.
It's pretty terrible. Yeah. And from here on, the last game that Midway would release, kind of like in the NBA Jam mold, would be NBA Hoops. And here, if you look at the cover, I mean, at least it's a little bit more definite. I mean, it's definitely not a Mona Lisa. I would say it's more of like a Francis Bacon,
Have I talked about how much I love Shaquille O'Neal?
So I feel like Shaquille O'Neal in this cover is looking into my soul. And he is about to like tear out my intestines.
Yeah.
You know?
It really is Shaq just like giving you the stare down while holding what I'm assuming is like a basketball that has the same fire effects as like flaming hot Cheetos bags do. Like, I don't know what kind of like 97 clip art this was. This fire. This is amazing.
It's very realistic. It's
I
very
wonder if
realistic.
it's like a reject art from Shaq Fu.
Oh my god, yes.
Oh yeah.
They didn't use it for Shaq Fu, so like, all right, let's use it now.
Yeah,
But you
let's
see,
bring it back.
Whereas, you know, the NBA Hang Time, the NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC cover, like it was cryptic. It was mysterious. It's like, what's happening here? What is Shaq really feeling here? NBA hoops, like, there's no question. There's no question what he's feeling here.
He's very upset.
He's very, very upset. You know, this was also the time where, you know, he had just left Kobe, you know, probably around this time, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, no, he was still on the Lakers around this time. And, he did not get along with Kobe. So he probably had a lot of feelings at the time. You know, he probably had a lot of emotions.
Do you ever seen those things where it's like, these are pictures of people taken before and after we told them we love them or you're beautiful or something? I feel like this is one where it's like, this is a picture of Shaq after we showed him a picture of Kobe.
Yeah, basically, like he's squeezing the ball as if it was Kobe's head, basically.
To be fair, I would look like that if I had to play with Kobe.
I think most people would look like that. I mean, the guy's a sociopath, but you know, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, this was released on home consoles at the time, so like GameCube, PS2. I believe it was also released on the Xbox. But by this point, Midway was just kind of, you know, just trying to see what stuck, and it really wasn't that popular. At least I don't remember this game coming out, you know, at the time and people really talking about it. But again, I think it was hurt by the lack of NBA Jam name. And also there's another element here, which is, at the time, EA had come out with NBA, Street. So was it Street?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So EA had come up with NBA Street, and that was kind of seen as a callback to NBA Jam, even though it had a different focus to it. So people were already, you know, either playing, you know, the NBA 2K games, or they were playing NBA Live, or they were playing, if they wanted something more arcadey, they were playing NBA Street. So Hoops just kind of came and went, and, you know, did not really have much of an earth-shattering reception.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Did you guys ever play this?
Well, I haven't, but I saw gameplay of it. It doesn't. I mean,
it looks terrible.
Yeah, it's just like,
I'm not gonna sugarcoat that one bit.
It's just not NBA Jam, and it's, you know, like you said, there were so many options at this point of basketball games, whether you were looking for something realistic or you were looking for something more arcadey. And honestly, I felt like Hoops was trying to be somewhere in the middle. And by doing that, it just ended up being the worst of both worlds. They did change it to 3-on-3 instead of 2-on-2, which again, I'm like, why?
Yeah.
And
the polygon graphics don't do it any favors.
No.
Like the one I saw was on the PS2, and the players just lack that personality. Also, they've all been doing like 20 rounds of testosterone.
Everyone is just
like
jacked.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's kind of. Go ahead, Cam.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, I haven't played it myself. I was looking up some gameplay on it, and it just looks so floaty. Like everyone's on the moon or something.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a product of like, oh, what do people like about NBA Jam? And they were like, oh, you get to jump high.
Yeah,
it's
well,
like, no,
I mean, you do that for dunks.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like,
but now it's like, oh no, let's just do it for everything because it looks good, I guess. And they're like, no,
dude's taking a jump shot and he lands 20 minutes later.
So yeah, I mean, that was an ignominious end for the NBA Jam series, or at least the mainline NBA Jam series. By this point, Acclaim had already withered, and they were not even trying anymore. So there wasn't really a revival of NBA Jam until like 2010, you know, when EA Sports kind of picked it back up and they released a contemporary version on consoles. So that one was pretty good. It definitely felt different. I don't think you can quite recapture that kind of fast-paced, sprite-based feel, with polygonal graphics.
Yeah.
It always feels a little bit different. Like you said, Paul or Cam, I mean, it feels like a little bit more floaty. But it was by all account a good return to form, to the NBA Jam franchise. So now it's held by EA Sports. So, if we want NBA Jam, the overlords at EA have to deem it, worthy, to release it. So we're going to take a quick break, guys. And then we're going to talk about some of the games that were influenced by NBA Jam. And, we'll be back and see you soon.
A real man isn't afraid to say he nurtures his skin. I nurture my skin. Shh. No, tell everyone.
Gold Bond Men's Lotion. Skin strengthening proteins plus 7 intensive moisturizers.
Man up with Gold Bond. Some players retire from the game and get soft. I get supple.
Gold Bond Men's Lotion. Skin strengthening proteins plus 7 intensive moisturizers. Dry skin becomes healthy, good looking. Gold Bond Men's Lotion.
Man up with Gold Bond.
Alright guys, and we're back, and now we're gonna branch out from NBA Jam and talk about a few of the other franchises that were influenced by NBA Jam. And a big part of this was, Midway itself, which, were the ones that developed NBA Jam. They just kind of applied the same kind of principles of NBA Jam to other sports. So I guess the next most successful one after NBA Jam was the NFL Blitz franchise, and that one was based on American football. And I know I saw a ton, of people playing this game back in the day. So it was really popular. You had like Madden, on one side. And then, if you were into a different sort of football, then you had your NFL Blitz. And it was kind of seen as, shoulder to shoulder. Not that it was the same quality of game, but it was just as fun, in its own particular way. So,
I don't have a ton of experience with NFL Blitz, but to me, like, as an outsider, because when these games were big, I was in Puerto Rico and we did not give a crap about football at all. But just as from somebody on the outside looking in, Madden always seemed to be the more technical, sort of striving for realism game that you would play if you knew football and you cared about the rules and all that sort of stuff. Whereas Blitz always seemed to be the more arcadey, sort of looser, more fun, easier to get into game that you could just pick up and play with your friends for a few hours.
Yeah. What about you, Cam?
Yeah, I'm definitely on board that theory. Like, if you gave me a Madden game to play, I wouldn't know what the hell to do.
Yeah.
But if you gave me an NFL Blitz game to play, let's go. Let's play. Yeah. It's easy. It's got that arcadey appeal to it where you can just pick it up and go. I remember playing a lot of NFL Blitz 2000 for N64, just, renting it for a couple times, and everybody brings over their controller, how it was back in the day there.
Yep. People trying to look at your plays that you're drawing up.
And I didn't know crap about football at the time, and I barely know crap about it now, but it was an easy enough game to pick up, get into, and then, even develop your own strategies without knowing anything about the sport.
Yeah. It's one of those that I think you, like you were saying, Cam, I think once you start playing it, even if you don't know anything about football, you just start recognizing, like, oh, these plays are good for this sort of situation, and these plays are good for this other sort of situation. And you start developing your own style of play.
Yeah. And you also mentioned something, Cam, which is very important. I mean, the fact that you could play this game with 4 players, like with the N64, that was pretty big because it was just a great party game. It helped solidify the perspective of the Nintendo 64 as just a great, game for like a Friday night playing with your buddies, over beers. So the NFL actually, eventually over time made Midway toned down some of the more aggressive aspects, like the late hits and stuff like that. They were not very keen on, the more aggressive aspects of the game. So, it was a little bit neutered, even though it ended up, still being pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
But, NFL Blitz, like a lot of those games, eventually die because, EA acquired the franchise, the NFL license. So without the players, Midway really couldn't really do much, anymore. And so what they did was they developed a successor called Blitz the League. And this is just a completely absurd game. It's not even like fantasy. It's around the time where everything needed to be gritty. and, games wanted to be adult oriented. And so, it had things like using steroids, like outwardly using steroids, like openly using steroids, like sending prostitutes to the other team's hotels the day before the game so that they would not have a good game.
So good.
Or if a player gets injured, you could either choose to just, treat the injury normally, which would take you some time, or just, put some steroids on it and, call it a day. I don't even know, like, who makes this shit up? But
This seems more accurate to real football than Madden.
I don't know. But for all of that, I mean, the game was refused classification in Australia. The Australians were like, no, mate, we're not going to do this.
No way. Okay. So, see, to me, this, like, Blitz the League as a concept makes perfect sense when you think about the fact that the NFL sort of made EA neuter their franchise, and then not EA, made, who did this game?
The NFL.
Yeah. The NFL made them, like, tone down the violence, and then they were like, actually, we're just going to sell our license exclusively to EA now, so bye.
Those assholes.
Yeah, and so they turn around and they're like, oh, you want us to tone it down? Oh, we're actually going to show you what we can actually do with this. So I love it. Like, all these ridiculous aspects, I think, make for such an interesting experience. Like, obviously, very, like, out there and, like, not sort of integral to the sport, but for people who are not into football, I feel like this is probably what you want to play. You want to play something that's fun and sort of ridiculous.
This is 100% what I want to play.
Yeah.
Like, this is so over the top. I didn't know about it until now, but I don't know, this game's like $5 or something.
Yeah.
I will go out and get it as soon as I can because I want to treat broken legs with steroids. I think it's hilarious.
Well, and another thing, I mean, this is one of the early games in the sports genre that try to develop a story, and nowadays putting a story into your sports game is kind of the mot du jour, with FIFA having its own The Journey story mode,
Yep.
and the NBA having its own storyline, etc. But this game did it, very early. And of course it was a ridiculous story,
I can't wait. I didn't even know it had a story mode. Ozzy, you're selling me this game all over again. I can't wait to see what it is.
We need to do a stream of this. We need to do
Does it have anything to do with deflated footballs? Or did they just, was that too much? I think that might have been too much.
That would have been too far. That was too ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Too far ahead of his time. They did not have the foresight of a Brady or Belichick. So
Right. That's pure evil.
Yeah. No,
These guys are just making video games.
They should have just made Tom Brady the cover athlete for this one. Perfectly, brand specific. It's very much on brand for him.
Absolutely.
They could put him up there with the 6 rings.
Yeah. And so there was a sequel to this called Blitz the League 2, released in 2008, and it had X-ray tackles.
This is my favorite part of it.
Yeah,
Paul.
yeah. So you could break bones, and you could see the bones being broken.
Yeah.
Actually, Paul, now that you mention it, I'm gonna see if I go out to GameStop, after this, and just pick it up because this does sound very good.
There was, you can look up on YouTube like a video collage of like every injury. And I'm pretty sure I saw it a while ago, so I'm having a hard time remembering, but I think there's one where like they do like a low tackle and it essentially like shatters this guy's pelvis or something. And
But you imagine though, Arnie, if it was so realistic that, you get to see the players grow old and then they have like Parkinson or they have like
CTE.
CTE and stuff like that. And it's like,
by the way, who's watching a compilation video of injuries?
me.
Like, what kind of psychopath is sitting there eating potato chips watching this?
But no, the best part of this whole thing is like every injury. So that like the injury would happen or something, it'd be like, broken hip, out for 3 plays.
But see, now Arnie, now I want something like BioShock in Blitz the League, where the players come back to you when they're older and they can barely move and they're like, why'd you do this to me, coach? I trusted in you. And you see like the effect of your actions, like injecting steroids in the middle of a field, like
The
how
Metal
much he has
Gear
destroyed
4
this
of
man.
football games where he comes back as old man
Exactly.
MVP.
I totally want this. This is what I want in a game.
Hideo Kojima presents Blitz the League 3.
It would probably be better than Death Stranding. Okay. So Blitz the League, it's super cheap right now because it came out, like the sequel at least, it came out on the PS3 and the 360.
Yep.
So right now it's at the sweet spot where, the games are super cheap. The original one came out on the original Xbox and the PS2. But it also had like its own team. So it was also pretty cool to just see them just come up with a whole new league, with like logos, players, etc. So it's a game that, they really tried. Like I commend Midway because they really tried. And unfortunately, Midway was on its way out at this point. Like they filed for bankruptcy in 2009. So, they were trying to go out with a bang. It was around this time that they also got like, John Woo to work on Stranglehold, which is a game based on, Chow Yun-fat's character of Tequila that, Detective Tequila or something like that. They were trying to launch Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe, etc. They were trying to do a lot of things in order to, have that last Hail Mary, pardon the pun, trying to save themselves. And so I think a lot of creativity came out of this game. I mean, it's a game that doesn't necessarily reflect well upon, the sport, and it makes the sport look really bad.
Yeah.
Probably unfairly so, but at the end of the day, it's kind of ridiculous and it's fantasy and you kind of just have to take it like that. It's not supposed to be realistic. It's not supposed to be real. Unfortunately, we don't have any more Blitz the Leagues out there. EA acquired the franchise. So they released, a PSN, like a downloadable edition of Blitz, like a new updated edition of Blitz, which, again, I'm not crazy about it because it just feels like, Paul, as you said, like they put their B team on it and they were just like, okay, let's release this, it's an arcade game. Let's just put it out there and, maybe a few people will buy it. It no longer feels like an event anymore. They certainly don't have it on par with like the Maddens or anything like that. So, maybe the solution to all this is they just have Madden and then they have a mode within it called Blitz, and this mode is just like the old school Blitz, that's kind of what, MLB The Show has done with its, game where, they have kind of like a Ken Griffey Jr., version, like an old arcade baseball game. So maybe that's the way for Blitz going forward, but unfortunately it's kind of dead at this point. But let's go back to hockey because we have two Canadians on the pod. So Midway also released a ridiculous version of hockey, and that was called NHL Hits. Very clever naming there. So I don't get hockey, so, Paul, I'll leave it to you as to, how ridiculous this is or not, because as it is, you can already fight in hockey, so it's kind of like, what else can they add? So
I know, right? That's the thing, right? Like every hockey game already includes a fighting element.
Yeah.
So when you make an NHL game, it's like you can fight. Okay. I mean, I've been able to do that since Blades of Steel.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So I kind of misses a little bit. It doesn't translate as well as Blitz, for example, because it just feels like, hockey is ridiculous enough as it is. So I don't know. Do you have experience with this back in the day?
No, I've never played this game.
Oh, for real?
Yeah. No, what can I tell you, man? Like there were a lot of hockey games out there.
Yeah.
Cause it wasn't just NHL Hits. There was like Hit the Ice. As you mentioned here, Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey. But in all seriousness, like the standard bearer was NHL and we didn't really need like hockey isn't as complicated as football. Like there doesn't need to be like an arcadey toned down version of it.
Yeah.
Because the gameplay in the NHL series, it's already pretty arcadey, right? So these games just didn't scratch the same itch that NHL could. You know what I mean? Because it just wasn't necessary.
Yeah. Like with football, you kind of always wonder, you're always curious about the things that you're prohibited in doing that, maybe you wish you could do. But with hockey, like you can already like go into players and ram into them. You already go pretty fast. So that's kind of like a turbo. And you already fight, as we have talked about. So it's like, what else can you do? You're not going to give the players wings. You're not going to give them a jetpack. because then
Whoa! I don't know, man. Jetpack's a pretty good idea.
That would be pretty awesome.
but that wouldn't be hockey anymore.
Well, here's the other thing: is much like arcade basketball peaked in '93 with NBA Jam, or maybe NBA Jam TE. I think Paul said this before. I think hockey games sort of peaked with NHL '94, and it's really only been a downhill slope from there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know enough about hockey to say one way or the other, but NHL '94 is one of the best, according to everyone. So
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to take a contrary perspective to that.
I think they should have just done exactly what they did with Blitz. Have all these guys be roided out and like put all these X-ray moves in here where they destroy each other's facial features while they're fighting or something like that.
I wish I had like a Canadian themed, version of sending strippers to their hotel room. Like, what would be the equivalent of that? Tell them the Raptors won the NBA series. I don't know.
Send them too much poutine.
There you go.
There you go.
Maybe. But yeah,
Dude,
so
we have in the town where I live, we have a shawarma poutine.
Yeah.
Like, that's so funny. I think the opposite. To me, it's like delicious.
See, I've always wondered about this too, because whenever I see whenever I see poutine places, it's always like, oh, try our barbecue buffalo chicken poutine, or our Tex-Mex poutine. And I'm like, do people in Canada actually like all these spins on poutine, or do they just like regular poutine? Because it seems like they're like, a lot of these places are trying really hard to get me to try other things aside from regular poutine.
Yeah.
It's
half and half. Like if you've never had it before, you just try the regular with the gravy and the cheese curds, and then after that, you might want to add, a little bit of bacon or a little bit of
Gotcha.
a little bit of shawarma, as the case may be.
My whole thing
all right,
is,
guys, bring it back.
Sorry. Going on with poutine here.
No, go for it, Cam. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, once you start adding all this stuff to it, is it even poutine
It's a really
anymore?
poutine.
It just becomes fries and crap.
That's true.
It's true.
right.
So moving on from hockey, we have MLB Slugfest, which was based on baseball.
Oh.
And this was again at the height of steroid mania. This is when actually, all the players were getting exposed for being roided out. This is when Roger Clemens was going up, against Congress, saying that he hadn't taken steroids, etc.
As he was ripping through his suit jacket,
Exactly.
turning green. Yeah.
Barry Bonds was having like a 65 home run season or something,
Well, that was the thing. Didn't Barry Bonds, when he started doing, there was no, slow ascent for Barry Bonds. Wasn't he, relatively normal looking one year, and then he came back from the off season and was fucking
well, so he was kind of an all around versatile player without getting too much into it, and for the Pittsburgh Pirates. But he saw that, Mark McGwire and Jose Canseco and all those people were getting much more recognition because they were just hitting home runs. And so from 1992 to 1993, he literally just got roided out. Yeah. And he just became like a power player. So there you go. But yeah, this is a game with a lot of missed opportunities. For example, there are no jetpacks. There are no arm cannons. But it's an interesting game, but certainly, at least to me, when I look at it, it doesn't feel like it goes far down the fantasy route as much as it should, because again, it's still baseball. Okay. And for a lot of people, baseball is boring, like Paul. So yeah, you could attack other players, you could go turbo, stuff like that. And, there was just a general air of unrealism. Like you could hit home runs like no one's watching, basically. It was really easy to hit home runs, but that was basically it. It didn't really have, a lot of other fantasy elements. And so I'm kind of thinking that this game would have been more popular if it had just dialed it up even a little bit more.
Yeah. So if it had replaced all the players with robots and just be named Base Wars or something.
Base Wars, yeah, something like that.
I feel like this game is the answer to a question nobody asked.
That's a very
nobody
very good point.
ridiculous baseball, and then Midway came out and said, "Here's ridiculous baseball," And then we wonder why they went bankrupt. But
Yeah. Well, you can't win them all.
This game was actually pretty popular. I have to say, I mean, look, it wasn't like, I think we also had an issue during this time is that we didn't really have a lot of good baseball games.
that's true.
You know, nowadays we have MLB The Show, and that's kind of the gold standard. I mean, it's pretty much the only standard nowadays. But at the time, there really weren't a lot of good baseball games. So you got your baseball wherever you could get it. You know, you could do some of like the 2K games, you know, like World Series Baseball or something like that, which was done by Sega. But I never really took to those games, unfortunately. There was something about them that felt off. So, you know, this game that really did have some following, you know, some of it at least. But again, baseball is a sport that it needs to be modernized or at least changed dynamically if you're going to try to present it to a broader audience. And maybe the people that were into baseball, you know, they didn't necessarily want something unrealistic. They just wanted their good old baseball. So yeah, this is a game that, you know, I think there were like 2, you know, versions of it released.
Okay.
Of course, one with Alex Rodriguez, who eventually would be busted for steroids. So at least he was ahead of the curve there. But yeah, MLB Slugfest doesn't exist anymore. It's done. That's it. And then there's also one more for European fans. There's Red Card Soccer, also done by Midway. And it's based on football, soccer, if you want to call it that. And seems like it's the same principle. You could attack other players, you could attack the referee, you could go turbo. There was only one version of this because by all accounts it was terrible.
See, attacking the referee, I think, is a cool feature that should have been in more of these games.
Do you imagine if LeBron James could attack the referee? Like, you know, if like the NBA players could attack the referees, I think that it would be a catastrophe.
It would be a bloodbath.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Essentially. But yeah, Red Card Soccer, not known to almost anybody. Like, literally,
I had no idea what this was until I
heard of this
watched
game.
it.
It's extremely obscure, you know, and for a football game to be that obscure is pretty impressive. So it came and went, only one entry, and that's it. You may never be able to find that out in the wild, but it's there, it exists. And so like we said, we also have like parallel to this, like the EA Street series. We're not going to talk about this. We're not going to focus a lot on this because they kind of had a different feel to them.
Yeah.
But certainly NBA Street kind of followed a lot of the same principles of NBA Jam.
Yeah.
And then from that, they also did NFL Street and FIFA Street. They were more based, not necessarily on, you know, the professional sport, but like the name implies, it was just street versions of the sport.
Yeah.
They're all good games. They're all very cheap nowadays. Pick them up. They're really nice.
NBA Street is really fun. I remember playing a ton of NBA Street back in the day and really enjoying it.
Yeah. So, you know, these are good games. NBA Street Volume 1 and 2, they're both very good. You know, they do have some real players, right? I mean, I believe they have real players.
Yeah.
So
do they? I think you're right.
They do.
And then didn't NBA Street eventually, like, I guess it didn't become, but eventually it, like, they started releasing the NBA Ballers or something like that?
That was Midway.
Was it Midway? Oh.
Yeah, that was Midway. That was NBA Ballers. Which was more centered on like acquiring like mansions and
it was pretty much
cars
like
and
build your way up so you can buy like a Ferrari and a mansion or something.
It was like Midway's version of MTV Cribs, basically.
Yeah.
You know, with a basketball game tacked on top. But that kind of rounds out, you know, the games that were influenced by it. Unfortunately, as you may be able to tell, there aren't that many games, you know, in this vein nowadays.
No.
And there are a number of reasons for that. I think, you know, the exclusive licenses and, you know, the league focus on brands is a really big point. You know, the fact that the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, all of them have a very, very keen eye for what can be and cannot be shown in their games. It makes it very difficult to create these experiences. And, you know, back in the day, you know, all these leagues were not really aware of what was being done in the games. They were just kind of like, oh, okay, you want to make a video game? Go ahead. But nowadays they're very keenly aware of it and they want to make sure that they have a unified brand and they have a unified marketing approach to it. So that's probably the biggest reason why they've been killed. But also there's just less interest, I think, you know. I don't think gamers have taken to this form of play, you know, as much anymore. And I can't really put a reason to that. I don't really know the reason for that. But it seems like certainly it's a waning interest, in the general audience.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I feel like, and I could be completely wrong about this, as I usually am, but I just feel like sports games in general just get a bad rep now at least amongst the kinds of gamers that we're generally around. I think people usually look down on sports games, but I feel like everybody owned at least one sports game growing up. Everybody has a sports game that they enjoyed playing. So I don't really understand why the sort of waning on, especially these kind of arcadey sports games, has sort of occurred, because that was the stuff that I was always interested in. Like playing with real teams, I don't care. I actually kind of enjoyed like the stupid fake team names that they would come up with for most of these games. So I would love to see a return of that sort of gameplay, of those sorts of games.
Yeah.
I'm wondering,
and also, go ahead, Cam.
I was going to say, I'm wondering if the whole, like how video games in general have just become so much more realistic over the last, 10, 15 years that these unrealistic games just kind of don't have a place anymore in the eyes of most mainstream gamers.
Yeah. I could see that. That was one thing I was going to say about Mutant Football League, is that I saw gameplay of it and it looks cool and it looks fun, but there's just something, and I don't know, this might be weird, but there's something about having like such good graphics on such a like insane looking game. I think it loses some of its charm as opposed to something like Mutant League Football on like a 16-bit system like the Genesis.
So I think, in that vein, Arnie, I think that maybe the solution to that is just kind of like make it cell shaded, for example.
Yeah.
Yes.
Make it look like a cartoon, because by its very definition, this is cartoony.
Yeah.
So, as you go more towards realism, there's that divide between, credibility, and your brain telling you, there's an uncanny gap here.
Yeah.
That I don't feel like this should be happening, like this is not right. So maybe that's a big part of the reason. So if you had something like that emulated, for example, like the Mutant League Football cartoons from 1994 to 1996, that would be freaking amazing. I just believe that there's so much more that could be done if developers were actually given reign to take advantage of this and be able to just kind of go wild with these ideas.
Yeah.
I think the blueprint is there with NBA Playgrounds. I don't know if you guys have played NBA Playgrounds. It wasn't reviewed very well, as you've noted here, Ozzy, but I don't know, man. I like NBA Playgrounds a lot, and a big reason is the cartoony look.
Yeah.
Like the players' heads are gigantic and the players' faces are very recognizable.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you kind of have to do with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. And, for what it's worth, the NBA Playground series, they were acquired by 2K. So now they officially have the 2K branding. So that gives it much more credibility. It allows it, in the eyes of gamers to say, oh, this is not just like a cheap, cash-in game.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think that there's so much more they can do, particularly, as we were talking about Blitz the League, nowadays it's fairly normal to put a storyline in games. If you could put like a fantasy storyline in these games and you could just do something completely off the wall, not necessarily sending prostitutes to, the hotels, etc., but something just, whimsical or fun, that doesn't abide by the conventions of just, your typical realistic, contract negotiation. Are you going to sign this? Are you going to sign that?
Ozzy, I just cracked the code.
What's up?
Final Fantasy VII hockey. Done. License to print money right there.
License to print money, yeah. Or we could talk about Blitzball, but that's another podcast. Anyways, another reason would have been the decline of arcades. NBA Jam is so intrinsically tied to the arcade experience.
Yeah.
That, you could definitely emulate it at home, but the arcade experience just has so much more to offer. They're both they're both good, but, being in the arcade right then and there just has a different type of hype to it. So the fact that arcades are kind of dead, you could find this, NBA Jam machines here and there. in a few bars, yes, it's good, but you're not going to get a new version of NBA Jam on arcade, which is kind of a shame.
Yeah.
But also the decline of couch co-op, like couch multiplayer. Like the fact that you no longer go to your friend's house and, for the most part, and play a game of NBA Jam or something like that. Like that's not as common anymore as it used to be back in the day with the advent of internet technology. So, it's a lot of factors coming together, and unfortunately we don't see a lot of it. I guess a question for all you guys. I mean, do you guys see a rebound for this? Man, I'm throwing out all the puns out here. Cam, do you see like a bounce back? God damn it!
Just let it happen.
For these types of ridiculous sports games?
No. Hard no. I just realistically don't see it happening. For all those reasons that you mentioned, I think the landscape has just changed, and there's just not really a spot for those kinds of games anymore. It's very unfortunate. Don't get me wrong, but I don't see any big developer throwing money into a game like that. Maybe an indie game or indie developer, but.
Yeah, but don't you see something like Rocket League, for example, where it's like, as you said, just an indie developer saying, we're going to make this happen, and kind of like with Playgrounds, they make something that's really good, or they could just take the Blitz the League approach and just create a bunch of fake teams. And, eventually even, the NFL could come around and say, hey, we're willing to license out our players to you. I don't know. It seems like it's
see
feasible.
that I don't see happening.
Yeah. The leagues are too image conscious to allow something like that. And I mean EA.
Yeah,
the amount of money that EA pays the NFL for that license is obscene.
It's got to be obscene. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's in the hundreds of millions, I think, or something.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
What about you, Paul? Do you see a resurgence in this, or?
I was joking about Final Fantasy VII Hockey, but like
the longer you sit on it, the more you want to protect it.
Oh, dude, don't get me wrong, it's 100% a success, right? There's no debating here. But like, if Capcom, for example, released a football game or soccer, I should say, because they're not, football doesn't have the worldwide appeal.
Yeah.
And so a Japanese developer is not going to touch that. So let's just say soccer, right? If Capcom released a soccer game with a league mode, and the players were from their gigantic stable of characters, and it had like ridiculous kind of Super Mario Strikers type gameplay, that could work.
Yeah. So Mega Man Soccer is what you're talking about.
Yeah, Mega Man Soccer.
Stop it. That game's terrible.
Speaking of Strikers, there's a rumor that there's a new Strikers in development.
I'd play that.
Yeah, see, I feel like Mario is really carrying the torch, as ridiculous as that sounds for these kinds of games, like with Mario Tennis Aces, and if there is a new Mario Strikers game coming out, like
in a way,
that's as ridiculous as you're probably gonna get.
But it's very much kitty oriented.
We didn't mention Strikers at all so far,
or Sluggers, or Dance Party, or Dance.
Yeah, but that's a different. I think that's outside the scope.
It's like a different, because that's just already with cartoon characters essentially, and it's not within the scope of. You still need to be grounded a little bit in realism, with respect to all of this. It's because otherwise we'd be talking about every single sports game, out there that did something fantastical.
But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, Ozzy, like with real life players,
never,
especially not football. Like with all the controversy surrounding brain injuries now, and the long-term effects on the players, it's like they don't want to go anywhere near that. And I don't blame them.
Yeah.
And I think that might be kind of the problem for the general gaming public, where if it's not the real players and the real licensing, they're not even going to bat their eye at it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Arnie, any thoughts on whether this come back?
I agree with Cam and Paul. Like, I don't think it's going to come back in that way anymore. Like, I just think that was a time and place, where that was viable, and I don't think it is anymore. I think you have a good idea, Ozzy, with like sports games with stories. I think, it's not a ridiculous game, quote unquote. But Golf Story, I think, is a good example of like, you can do something sports centric and make it like story driven, and people will enjoy it. obviously golf is a very different sport from like basketball or hockey or football. But I think, I think there is something that could be mined there somewhere if somebody had like the right idea.
No, and for example, like you see a game like you just mentioned Golf Story, but also something like Supergiant Games is Pyre. I don't know if you guys ever play Pyre, but Pyre is very much a sports game, but with a storyline, like a fantasy storyline, attached to it. So that was done by an indie developer. And I feel like, if you create a sports game, the beauty about a sports game is that you only have to create the rules. You create the rules, and you kind of build the framework of it. And then from that, the rest of the work is just kind of building things around those set of rules that you created, because the gameplay itself is emergent.
Yep.
So it makes it, yes, balancing is a pain in the butt, and creating a good sports game is not easy. Mm-hmm. But if you get the sports part down, then it should be fairly straightforward to, add more stuff to it, from an indie perspective.
Yeah. Or we could see, like you had said before, like maybe an arcade sort of mode in a like big sports release, like something like The Show or Madden or 2K or something.
But there are a few games out there right now, that are kind of doing, the ridiculous sports game type of thing, so there's a game called Dunk Lords, which is, like pretty much NBA Jam.
Amazing name, by the way. With
16 characters, you're not going to play as LeBron James or as, Kawhi Leonard. But it has 16 characters with individual abilities. So it feels more like a fighting game in terms of like the character selection. There's also Museum Football League, which we already talked about. There's the NBA Playground Series, which we also talked about. And then there's also Blood Bowl, which I'm not crazy about, but it just combines American football with Warhammer 40K. Yeah. And every time I hear Warhammer 40K, it's just like my brain shuts off.
Blood Bowl is an interesting. Blood Bowl is an interesting one. I have it for the Xbox 360, and I played around a little bit in it. But honestly, to me, it's, if you're already not a huge fan of like figuring out the rules in football and all the minutia that goes into it, adding sort of a board game element to it that also has like a bunch of rules is probably not the way to go to get that target market.
Yeah. But so there are a few out there, maybe pick them up. Like again, a lot of these games, you can always go back to the older ones. The thing with sports games is that they don't appreciate in value, so they're probably pretty cheap. So you can get a lot of the games that we talked about, on the cheap. So, they're still out there. You can still play them. And a lot of them are still good fun.
Yep.
Maybe not NBA hoops, but, there are a ton of others that we just discussed. But I guess to round it out, let me ask you, Cam, what sport would you want to see get the fantasy treatment? If you had your druthers and you could have a say on whatever sport you wanted, what sport would you want it to be?
See, this is the toughest question because
that's why I asked it.
Yeah, I know, right? As a Canadian, I want to say hockey, right? But then you guys already mentioned that hockey's already pretty extreme as it is.
The players have weapons; they give them sticks. They're all armed already.
You're allowed to fight.
Yeah.
I would really like to see another NFL Blitz type game, right?
Yeah.
Just purely based on my memories of playing it, even though I have excellent memories of playing NBA Jam. I don't know. There's something about that that NFL Blitz formula that just really worked.
Yeah. What about you, Paul?
If I wanted to see a fantasy treatment, I just want to see maximum ridiculousness. And for me, that would be something NBA related.
Yeah.
But the storyline is all about beefs between players. That's all I want. I want Dragon Ball Z treatment where like LeBron and Kevin Durant are training against like jabronis, and then eventually they meet in the end and they power up. That's just my fantasy anyway.
What about you, Artie?
I was thinking about this and I thought I came up with a really good answer. And with Wimbledon in the air, I think a tennis game. Let me like throw my racket at the chair umpire. Let me put some laxatives in my opponent's like drinking water or something.
Damn it, Arnie again with a better idea than what I could come up with.
I think a sweet like insane tennis game where you can like hit the ball so hard it blows somebody's arm off or something would be really interesting.
What
And
about
can I
this?
also add? Can I also add beefs to the tennis game
Oh,
too?
yeah.
I want really polite, threats between the tennis players that are just completely ridiculous. I want Roger Federer to be like, well, I just don't think he's very good.
He's a carpetbagger.
Here's my thought. What about lacrosse?
Oh God, another
Oh, my
game where the
God.
players are already armed.
Right?
Well, yes, and that's what makes it beautiful, because lacrosse is based on an old Native American sport in which the ball was the head of their enemies.
Oh my God.
So
What?
think about the possibilities. Think about the possibilities there in which you could fight your enemies and then they become the ball after you, sever their heads.
Great.
I think
Amazing.
that there's something here. I think that and certainly you could use steroids and you could send prostitutes and all of the other good stuff. And you could have beefs.
Oh, there
Certainly.
definitely needs to be steroids in the tennis game. I want to see
Oh, yeah.
roided out Rafa Nadal or something. Just injecting into his broken knees.
I also want to see them have like one gigantic arm and then one really spindly arm.
The serving arm.
Yeah, the serving arm's just huge.
Here's a parting thought. What about ridiculous NASCAR? What do you guys think about
You
that?
mean Carmageddon?
So burnout?
Oh yeah,
Well, that wouldn't be terrible, except you only drive left.
that's true. Yeah, you only go in circles.
Anyways, I think that's all for all of us today, guys. I think we've covered the full spectrum of this. So, Cam, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram. My username is 16bit. All letters with underscore between 16 and bit.
How about you, Paul?
Instagram, Paul's_game room.
Arnie?
You can always find us on the @Region Free Gamers podcast Instagram, and I think based on when this is coming out, we'll also have a website ?
Yeah, we will. And I was just about to mention that, Arnie, so thank you for bringing that up.
That's right.
Yeah, we launched our website. The website pretty much is our one-stop shop to, everything Region Free Gamers, because we're a franchise now. And we want to make sure that we have our brand on point.
Also follow @Matthew Perry on Instagram and Twitter.
No, but seriously, I mean, with the website, you can go over there and, you can get the latest news on what we're doing. And, you can also, do a survey of, what you think of the episodes. But it's also a platform for us to just do a little bit more long form writing. So if you want to hear a little bit more of a postmortem on what we have just talked about, on a more organized way rather than just us shooting the shit, then that may be the platform, that you want to just supplement, when listening to the podcast. So, we're really excited about it. We're really putting our backs into it. So, we hope you like it.
Yep.
And, if you want to reach out to us, we're always there. We're always on Instagram. We're always, we're going to be on the website. You can contact us by email. So we always like to hear from everyone. So, if you're, have any thoughts, if you are bothered by our Tom Brady, bashing,
I'm gonna write a strongly worded email.
I'm pretty much gonna assume it's Arnie under a pseudonym, but anyways, that covers it for us. You can find me at Shadow the Collector on Instagram, with periods in between those words. And my name is Ozzy, and I have been your host for today. And thank you. Keep playing these awesome games. Make sure to, pick up and play with your friends. Do couch co-op, couch play. Play NBA jams. Just live life, have fun, man.
Yeah.
And until next time, see you around.
Obviously, very out there and not sort of integral